Off to the Midwest for the not especially accurately named Cincy 3, a 3-day series consisting of 2 races outside the city's beltway and a third held in an entirely different state. Of course, as anyone who went to Worlds in Louisville last year can tell you, there is something to be said for putting some space between your venue and the Ohio River. Anyway, we'll take a look at the women's race from Sunday's Harbin International. First thing I noticed at the start is Cannondale Cyclocross World's Katie Antonow is lined up in this flat-footed, not on the saddle position. I know she's on the shorter side, and I know it's how she started at Providence, but I can't help but feel she's spotting a few tenths of a second with that flat-footed start. Kind of at the other end of the spectrum is Raleigh Clement's Caroline Mani. No question the power and effort going in as soon as the whistle blows, but that Stairmaster-like posture is throwing away energy that could be moving her forward on fighting air resistance. Hole shot an early lead went to Trek's Katie Compton, and she kept the gas pedal down, hammering through a rather rough sand section here. It's not so much because she's the World Cup leader and she'll be making the selections, thank you very much, but because every body between her and Katarina Nash is another obstacle the Luna rider has to burn seconds and energy to pass. By halfway through the first lap, it was Compton, a few seconds clear of Nash, who was in turn a few seconds ahead of an Antonou-led pack. But as the race wore on, the first gap would narrow and the second would widen. Watch Nash cruise through this tight off-camber corner right before the barriers, while a few seconds later Antonou's on the brakes so hard that you can almost read the logos on her rims. This keeps the bunch tight and close behind her. It also helps to remember that Compton and Nash, second and fourth in last year's World Championships, are about as good as it gets. And a lap in, their gap was already 20 seconds. In the chase group, Antonou continued to pull, breaking up the pack a bit, but also isolating herself with 2 Cal Giant riders. Always a good idea to take a peek back once in a while, like Elle Anderson does here, to keep an eye on the race situation. But remember also, the important stuff does tend to be in front of you. By halfway through the second lap, Nash had made contact with Compton, and the duo stuck together well. Behind them it was still Antonou doing work, while Anderson marked and her teammate Meredith Miller grabbed a pit bike, but continued to chase. By the end of the lap, the trio were back together. Watching these two groups was interesting. Here you can actually see Compton close down on Nash due to her disc brake's shorter stopping distance, but also notice where both riders start to pedal again coming out of this 180. Now compare it to Antonou, who carries in much more speed a few seconds later, but brakes late and has to take a wider line, leaving room for Miller to nearly get by. Compton and Nash continued their temporary cooperation, while behind, the outnumbered Antonou seemed to almost ride defensively. But by 2 laps to go, the Cal Giant duo was trading attacks in earnest as Miller accelerated through the sand, forcing the Cannondale cyclocross rider to chase. While Anderson was temporarily gapped, she clawed her way back up and, after the barriers, slipped around Miller to launch her own attack. Meanwhile, the leading 2 were finally beginning to split up, as Compton began standing and driving corners hard, while Nash countered just after the bell, not missing a pedal stroke through the sand and managing a few bike lengths lead by the barriers. Anderson, meanwhile, maintained her position in third, while Miller used her momentum coming out of a quick down-up to slip by Antonou on the tape and attack the final half of the bell lap. At the front of the race, Compton clawed back the distance in the closing meters, only to find that by the finishing stretch, the matches had already been burned. Anderson cruised home in third, and while the Little Badger made it interesting, in the end she'd have to settle for fifth behind Miller. I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that's how the race was won.